right, guys, we're going to start our panel discussion now, which is the only thing between us and lunch, so we'll try not to go too long. But we definitely appreciate the fact that many of you did respond with questions you wanted to have answered. And unlike previous years where we've had to go to the audience, which we would love to do at the end of this, we have a lot of questions already sent in. So we'll go through the questions we received, and then hopefully that will stir up other questions amongst you guys for today. So our normal disclaimer, if we say anything, it may not be true. And then our panel, I've got Mike DeGoyce to my left, who is our Director of Services. Next to him is Sonia, who is our Sonia Fournier, who is our Senior Consultant and also our Training Coordinator. Rory Cornelius, who's a Senior Solution Architect, and Paul Mendelson, also known as Cognos Paul, who is a Senior Solution Architect. All right, you guys want to introduce yourselves at all beyond that? Nah. All right. So let's jump into some questions. I actually decided to throw in a really hard one to start to get them like kind of used to talking. So what's your favorite color and why? And I'll get us going with this. My favorite color is blue. Growing up, my dad's favorite color was blue, my mom's favorite color was red, and my sister chose red, so I was like, I'll choose blue. So that's why my favorite color is blue.
Wow, I didn't see this one coming. I'm going to go with gray. It's very nice and neutral, pretty straightforward kind of guy. I don't want to get too crazy with any of these bright colors. And I just like wrestling with things that are in gray area.
Thanks for being fancy. All right. My favorite is the red-orange crayon that's in the Crayola box because it's the best one for coloring.
Objectively.
That's just not objective.
I'll have to go with blue on mine too. I've just been a diehard Cubs fan my whole life, and I just always went to the blue.
Well, obviously I can't choose blue now, so I'll go with green because it's the color of go.
Okay, so now into some little bit more technical questions. So this one we received from a person, one of the people here today. So how can I overcome perceived limitations of Cognos Analytics, particularly as it relates to trying to displace footholds of other tools in our organization?
Okay. So yeah, I mean, this kind of thing has come up a decent amount because what we've seen happen is a lot of these other tools are very easily accessible via the internet. So within pockets of the organization, somebody downloads Tableau, for instance. They sign up for Domo or something like that, and they build something that looks pretty, and they then show it to someone who says, well, I haven't seen anything that looks like that come from Cognos. And it pretty much starts there, this idea that these other tools are more modern, you can build things faster, yada, yada, yada. And so that then kind of gets socialized throughout the organization. So, I mean, I think a big part of it is education. It can often be just kind of showing something in Cognos that kind of displaces that. People often, obviously Cognos has been around for a long time, and so there's just kind of this inherent like inertia that comes, I think, with certain tools that have been around for a while. People develop a perception about them, they remember older versions of them, they remember some bad experience that they had with some report that didn't meet their needs, etc. And then there's just the element of like the new thing that's out kind of seems to have some cachet to it frequently. I think psychologically we kind of do that with things. So understand what it is about whatever it is in Tableau or Click or something that they like about it. If it's really just the way that it looks, you can make something that looks probably exactly the same in Cognos. If there's something else they like about it, then adjust those concerns. I mean, different tools do have different advantages, so there could be something legitimate that they like in one of those other tools that isn't as easy to do in Cognos. You don't have to be dishonest about those things. But the reality is, from a substantive standpoint, it's pretty unlikely that there's something in another tool that is really a significant advantage that you can't do on the IBM platform these days.
Yep.
I think that's something.
Nods, all right.
Yeah.
All right, so what's the best way to deal with issues related to data transformation or data governance, particularly as it relates to preparing for self-service or AI or reporting? So basically your data prep activities.
None of us? No?
Go for it.
Can't do all this.
I feel like you could. Yeah, this is the biggest thing we're seeing with with the self-service is that if the data's not prepped properly to get started, it's very hard to get the ease of access for different users to get the information they want from it. So I think we're doing a lot more work up, like behind the scenes before it ever gets to the users. And it's part of it is still sticking with the, we still need the big governed sets of data where we're careful what data is inside there. But it's also giving some access to those new tools, the data, like the data modules and things like that, so that you can still push that out. Now, whether that's pulling your data from your governed, like those data sets from the governed data framework manager packages or wherever the data is coming from, and being able to push it back to your users that way so that they can take small pieces. We're creating a lot more mini data modules that can then be used in the self-service pieces of, like I said, pieces of our big models, which maybe can, instead of one big giant package where everything comes from, we're creating a lot more mini modules in there. Anybody else have anything with that?
In terms of the data governance, there are a lot of different ways of securing the data. There's object security, data security, and many different places that you can apply it. But the most important thing is planning on where to do it at the beginning. So forward looking and knowing how to extend it so the same security model can be applied in different packages across different models while still allowing all of your users to access the same types of reports. You want user A from group A to access the same report that a completely different user in a different group would be able to access, but still be assured that they only see the data that they're allowed to. And that's something that a lot of thoughts should be put into at the beginning of the project, rather at the end when everything's already been built out and you don't want to have to go back and rebuild anything.
One thing I should say as we go is that if anyone in the audience has a follow-on question, feel free to raise a hand and we can take questions. So we got follow-up questions. Start over here because Brian's might be tough. Yours might be tough too.
The question I would have is, when you're looking at data modules and you're wanting to push kind of end users out there, what is the best way you see at governing what calculations they're making at a quick glance? So with framework, you could search all the report spec XML because it's all stored kind of locally, or the model XML, sorry. What is the best way on a data module perspective to say, who's making something called revenue, who's making something called profit? So I can easily go back in and track users that are making these metrics to ensure that they are putting the right calculation.
Yeah, so just to repeat the question, essentially it relates to data governance to some degree. So as users are using data modules and they are creating their own calculations, what is the best way to search those calculations and make sure that their definition of a item is the same as like the standardized definition? Does that sum it up okay?
Yeah.
Okay.
Everything's stored as XML. And everything's stored as XML. Everything's stored as XML or various forms of it in the content store. So it should be possible to traverse through the content store to identify certain fields that have been named that. You can associate dashboards to specific data modules. So it should be possible to create a procedure that will loop through and identify any fields that have been written. But I think it's something that we should talk about later.
Brian, did you have a question as well?
My question is really about how many clients do you see are actually formulating analytics governance policies in writing and sending them out to the organization as they start to roll out self-service. So this is about access and use and what you should and shouldn't do, what will happen to you if you abuse your self-service privilege.
Yeah. Right. For those of you that didn't hear that, the question was, how many organizations do we see actually implementing governance approaches before rolling out self-service, particularly as it relates to self-service data preparation?
I mean, yeah, I can speak personally, and I haven't really seen that formalized at the clients that I've been working with. I mean, there's some general like user education that's happening, of course, and there might be kind of a internal training session where you're like, hey, here's how you do this, and be aware of these things. But as far as a real kind of like thoughtful, formalized approach, like really socializing things widely so that people are aware of it, I can't say I've seen that done maybe at the level that it could be at this point. I'd say most of the projects I've been involved in, though, have been a little bit more kind of proof of concept with some of the new tools that have been rolling out, as opposed to like, we're now ready to do this for the entire organization. So it's maybe been more like gathering the lessons that then could be formalized into those larger policies when the broader rollout happens. But that's just my own personal experience.
Same. I mean, we could ask out too if, does
Anyone else want to share an experience they've had? Has anyone here implemented more of like a true governance approach as rolling out data modules?
it's a good thing to think about. I mean, I think
Yeah.
we need to add it to our, strategy when we're going in, for sure.
Yeah, I think at least my experience, that's been a little bit of the hesitation actually of rolling out data modules to people, of not having that ability to have that governance in place the way they want it to be. And I know there is some data security options that you can do in data modules, and that is a possibility. But yeah, when it comes to self-service, it's a little bit harder to set that up, and it's something that definitely needs to be thought about. But yeah, I haven't seen anything very formalized around it.
One thing that I would say though is that I always tell this to our clients, like some form of governance is better than no governance at all. So even though maybe there's not like a formal governance policy around your data, the sheer fact that now you can see what people are doing is better than just, hey, they're going to go use some other tool that you have no control over and roll out the exact same reports, and maybe those reports are wrong and they're going to thousands of users. At least inside of Cognos Analytics, if they're building something that's going out to a lot of people, you can start to try to understand what they're doing with that and perhaps bring that back within IT's governance.
Yeah, a couple thoughts. One idea that we've kind of become very acclimated to ourselves and that we talk to our customers about in terms of data governance is just this idea. I know it comes up multiple times throughout these sorts of events and in conversations that are happening at them, but so this aversion or kind of anxiety about incorporating these data sources that are not fully governed, and what do we do about that, and how do we balance that? And the thing that we try to talk about is just like these are steps. There's steps in a process. So just because you allow someone to bring in data from an Excel spreadsheet doesn't mean that's the final state of affairs. It just means that like that's something that's going to be happening in the organization. People are going to be taking data that they have in a spreadsheet, and they are going to be using that data. They're going to be creating visualizations off of it, whether they're doing it in Excel, whether they're doing it in Tableau, or what have you. They're going to be doing it. So to Dustin's point, allowing them to then bring that into your kind of managed Cognos sort of environment and architecture gives you some additional layer of, if not control, at least visibility and accountability. So you might be able to use something like Paul's talking about. You might be able to actually like search through the content store, traverse the XML, and like come up with more information about it, as opposed to it's sitting out there somewhere on someone's computer on the network in some other analytic system, and you really have no way to even get at it. Or at least you could implement kind of a periodic review. You could use a tool like Thrive, for instance, to look at, okay, who's actually creating data modules, and let's talk to those folks. Let's make sure that they know what they're doing, or let's review the content that they've created. We have that all in one place. But these sorts of things are unique to each organization. I mean, there's aspects of just what sorts of data you work with, how many sources, what the culture is like at your organization. So it's hard to come up with one-size-fits-all approaches to these things. But we continue to kind of gather best practices, and when we're able, we try to formalize those things and talk to our customers about them.
Yeah.
One of the problems I have with data modules is that I can't see what the report dependencies are, like I can in Framework Manager. Is that something that we can do in the later release, or something we find in the content store, or something's on the roadmap for data modules?
Okay, so the question was, and I don't know if we know the answer up here, or maybe someone in the IBMers knows, but one of the challenges with data modules is not being able to see report dependencies like you can see in Framework Manager. So is that something that there's a way to do within the content store, or is that on the roadmap to be able to say, hey, this data module is feeding these 17 reports?
Called Thrive.
All right, we just got a shout from the crowd. It's called Thrive, which Thrive does provide that, so that means it is in the content store. Okay. All right. Moving on then. So This next one I think we just answered with our last presentation. So what's the best approach to enabling business self-service? I don't know if any of our panelists have anything to add to the great things Heather and Ryan shared.
I think they
45
covered it
minutes.
pretty well,
Let's
so.
go.
Got it. All right, well, whoever's in that question, hopefully you're very pleased to see a whole session on your question. All right, what's the biggest challenges to user adoption, and what are the biggest challenges? Yeah, to user adoption, and how do we overcome them? Don't yell "thrive" again, Ryan.
I think one of the challenges is just fear of change, education around it. We need to make sure that the people that we're expecting to do this self-service or kind of take on this new responsibility, they need to feel like they're getting something out of it. They're not just going to do it just because it's there. You need to show them how they can gain new insights or gain new information based on these new tools that are available, and they need to know how to use it. So you need to provide some form of training or education. Sit down with them, take them through an example. People need to know how to use it before they're going to actually adopt it in their lives.
I would also add that user confidence in the data is incredibly important. If the user runs a report and very first time sees blatantly wrong information, that will color his opinion for the rest of time. So it's very important to do proper QA, user testing, before the reports are released to the rest of the organization. And the same thing is true with self-service. Make sure that you test all of the data modules before you release them. Do proper training so the users know what they're doing. Don't just throw it out there. The users are going to pull in the wrong things and then blame you when they get the wrong numbers.
I will add one thing here, which is just that there's kind of this natural push and pull between self-service and governance. Because self-service naturally wants to say, like, I want this quickly, I want it my way, I don't want anyone controlling what I do. So in some ways, user adoption, particularly around self-service, is just convincing people, like, yeah, you can still do all the things you're doing in your other tool. And sure, we have oversight over it, but we're not going to stop you. And I think that's also a challenge for IT to get behind, because many of us in the room are in IT, and we're used to having full governance, full control. If we really want to stop users from going and using other tools, then we need to actually enable them to use all of the self-service features that are available in Cognos 11. So, my 2 cents. All right, in what situations should we use Cognos dashboards versus Planning Analytics Workspace when reporting against TM1 sources? They seem to overlap a good bit. Notice we didn't edit anyone's questions. These are all just raw, and we'll answer them the best we can.
I think I'm probably expected to answer this.
Yeah.
So I'm not an expert really in planning analytics, but I've done a lot of work over the last couple of years, as evidenced by some of the sessions that I know some of you attended yesterday on reporting on planning analytics from Cognos Analytics. So my personal perspective on this is actually that in probably most circumstances right now, if you want to do the kind of ad hoc dashboarding, Planning Analytics Workspace might be a better fit than the Cognos dashboards tool. There's a few different reasons for that. And again, it's not really from my in-depth knowledge of Planning Analytics Workspace, but more from my experience using Cognos dashboards. And I think this equation might change pretty significantly in a few months here, which I'll talk to in a second. But right now, there's just some limitations in using Cognos dashboards. To me, the chief among them is just that you get this metadata view, essentially, of your cubes in the dashboards tool as opposed to a member view. So the example I always use is from time dimension, because everyone's familiar with it, but you can't expand like years and then grab, I want to get 2016, 2018, and 2019. For some reason left out 2017, but you want to be able to grab a kind of a custom set like that and drag it on. That's a common thing people are used to being able to do in working with the cube, and you can't really do that in a dashboard right now. Like, there's still ways you can get the same results. You can filter your results. You can get your answers there, but it's maybe just not in that intuitive manner that you might be used to working with dimensional data. And there's some other kind of limitations there as well. But all that to say, if you really want to do that kind of ad hoc visual sort of analysis, you can do very similar sorts of things in Planning Analytics Workspace. You also have some write-back capabilities there, so that might be a better fit at the moment. That being said, the things that we're hearing from IBM is that there's going to be some pretty significant additional developments in dashboards, which has evolved pretty quickly and rapidly. I guess that's redundant. It's evolved rapidly over the last couple of years, and it's going to in relation to dimensional data sources probably later this year. So revisit that, maybe 3-6 months from now, and the answer could be different, but at the moment I might lean towards Planning Analytics Workspace. Now, if you want to operationalize things, doing stuff in Cognos reporting is extremely powerful on top of Planning Analytics, and we'll make the session available that I did yesterday, which went into that in depth.
Anyone else anything to add? Anyone in the audience anything to add? All right. This next one, our biggest problem is not having our data like in one place where it's ready to report on. Is this common?
Yes.
Next question.
Yeah.
It's extremely common. Anybody? You got anything to say?
Data sets. That's it.
Anyone want to
Yeah,
elaborate
I
on
will.
that? People that may not know what data sets are.
I will.
Go ahead.
I
You'll
can
finish
continue on that one.
process.
I can finish that one. Yeah, definitely take data modules and data sets in mind. Anybody who doesn't know what data sets are by now, I mean, it's basically a simple list snapshot of data, and they're really easy to put together, really simple to update. You can pull data from multiple different sources into into individual data sets, and then tie them together, data module, and report off of them. It solves a lot of issues where you have data across a lot of different places and are able to pull it in and report off of it efficiently using a data module.
The only thing I would add is just that, I mean, there's a lot of ways to solve this sort of problem. It doesn't necessarily have to even be a problem. Your data can be in different locations. You can report on it in Cognos, pulling from multiple locations, as by most of you are aware. There's a number of different ways to do that, a number of different ways to bring it together, depending on exactly what your requirements are. There's, of course, many solutions outside of Cognos, so more on the data layer as well. If this was a question that came from someone that filled out the survey, and you want to have a more in-depth discussion, we certainly can, because we want to understand kind of your full requirements to make recommendations as far as exactly how to solve this.
Right. Our biggest challenge is having the organization to understand the data and what we can do to help them better understand it. Any advice? So I interpret this as basically helping people understand what they see once you've either delivered a report or delivered content to them.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think that there's some things happening in terms of augmented analytics. Well, I'm having trouble saying that. That we've looked at a good bit yesterday in a few of the sessions that actually help with that. Like, there's some kind of narrative information that's like, hey, this one period really stands out from all the others, and it calls your attention to things that have statistical significance. So I think that can be helpful just in calling your attention to the right things. I also think building content that isn't just a dump of numbers, but more is like built into it is highlighting the things that are important, which could be anywhere from setting up kind of conditional formatting to highlight exceptions, or to measure numbers against some sort of baseline, to setting something up in like Event Studio, so someone only gets something if it means something, essentially, rather than just, well, I get a report every day and I gotta like page through it and try to figure out if any of this is important. I also think there's potential just to put, I'm going to say little nuggets, kind of embedded within your reports, especially interactive sorts of content. One of the examples I showed yesterday showed something you did for a customer where there's just every single tab of a dashboard that you go to in the same spot, there's a little like book icon. You just mouse over it, and it has like 5 bullets of like basic information about how to interact with that dashboard screen and like some pointers about what to be looking for there. So I think maybe we don't do enough of that, just include a little bit of like basic inline help, if you will, that's just very easily accessible.
This would also be another great use case for the Exploration Studio. Simply being able to play with your data, you click on a graph, you explore it, and the AI will help you look for anomalies or certain points of interest in your data that you can then further explore. That's what it's here for.
Yeah, just one last thing on that one, same thing Mike was saying. Part of the way we put reports together, so we kind of started at the point where we always did big dumps of data. and then we moved to dashboards, but without often a lot of care for what we put on the dashboards and if it was meaningful or not. So instead of putting, just very, really complex visualizations together, being thoughtful on the type of visualizations that are actually meaningful and how they look, and art pie charts are really important as we start to build these dashboards that everybody wants to start with.
Sonia just stole exactly what I was thinking, so that's perfect.
No
yeah.
pie charts.
I think the two most common issues that people make are either just data dumps, like here's all your data in columns and rows, or like I'm going to try to make something look incredible and I don't care what information is being conveyed. So just fill it up with charts and hope it looks good. So I think understanding your end user and understanding like what they're trying to do with that data, and then trying to work backward from here are the decisions they're trying to make. How do I help them see that information really quickly whenever they're looking at this? All right, so moving on. Oh, any follow-up questions for those? All right, so what do you think is the biggest driver of success in a data and analytics project or implementation?
Start.
Yeah.
There's a session that we did a previous year here at Bacon about gathering requirements and requirements versus specifications. The quick summary of it is basically requirements is really understanding the underlying problem, whereas specifications is kind of an outline of exactly how you're going to solve that problem. And we frequently, as developers, I think, and consultants even, or whatever role you're playing in an organization, we like to jump to the specifications and saying how that problem should be solved. As soon as I think humans do this in general, we're hearing someone talk and we start jumping to conclusions about things. We don't spend enough time just listening, trying to understand. So I think the biggest driver of success is really understanding the problem that we're trying to solve at the outset, as kind of Dustin and Sonia were just alluding to as well, making sure that what we're delivering is in line with that. But that takes real effort, and it takes kind of a change in probably our natural approach to things, is to spend more time, ask a lot of questions, don't be afraid to quote unquote look dumb or ask dumb questions or whatever, because you're talking to probably some business unit. They live and breathe this stuff every day. And we definitely experience this a lot as consultants, because you're going into an organization that maybe is an industry that you don't even have familiarity with. And you kind of have to ask a lot of questions to even get them to realize that they're using acronyms or just describing things that are very obvious to them because they've been doing it for the last 15 or 20 years, but to you are completely new concepts. So within your organization, you might have to do that as well. Maybe you haven't worked with the finance team before, and they're talking about their financial documents, financial statements that they generate every single month. And to them, it's like breathing. But to you, those are new concepts, or maybe you haven't referenced them since college when you did a business degree or whatever it is. Don't be afraid to ask those questions and really understand the core problem that you're trying to solve. If you really grasp that, then I feel like that's going to ensure that at the end of the day you do have that success that you're looking for.
Anything else?
Takers, anyone want to share personal experience where they've seen success in their organization? Any tips? Yeah, Brian, please.
I get to play with a lot of these projects, right? One of the things I've seen is I think that some of the projects that are not held up as a success are actually successful because we lost sight of what we were originally trying to do. So I was trying to have like 2 or 3 metrics or measurements that were goals, and I keep those throughout the process. So at the airline example, we were trying to save 20% of diverted bags, and we in fact saved I think 50 or 60% of diverted bags, but they were on to the next thing already, which wasn't going as quick, and they forgot that was the goal of doing the project, and that paid for the whole project. So a lot of times when I see this question, it's just that because of the agile way that we move in these projects, we tend to be on to the next thing right away, and we forget that we already succeeded on the thing that originally got us to doing to begin with. Just my 2 cents. And some take longer than others, right? But there are a lot that I find that value metric early. What's going to pay for all this and make it worth it, and make sure that it stays on top of all the forward stuff, so that we don't lose sight of the fact that we are measuring through the sum.
Summarize that in case anyone couldn't hear. Essentially, it was focus on, remember the goal throughout the project or throughout whatever implementation you're doing. So define those goals early, and Brian brought up the point that often you'll move past that first goal and you'll start getting to a second or third goal because that first goal is either identified as not really what you wanted or potentially too cumbersome, or maybe you've already accomplished it in the first few minutes or the first few days of the project.
It's like, in America, it took us a week.
Yeah.
It got done so quick, they're like, oh, well, that shouldn't have been the goal.
Yeah.
Save money. They only took like eight days.
Yeah.
And so we were on to the next 10 things, and then they were measuring against something that, so you always have a way to celebrate that early success, even if it comes faster than you would have expected.
Awesome. All right. What are some use cases for the Jupyter Notebook integration that is integrated as of 11.1.2?
So there's kind of an infinite number, and I'm not a true data scientist. I'm just a citizen data scientist, if you will. So I won't be able to speak to all of them by any stretch. And probably even if someone was, they wouldn't speak to all of them because it's such a capable, sort of flexible tool set. But
Do you want to give an overview of what it is for those who don't know?
yeah, I mean, basically, it's a way that you can integrate kind of visualizations and code, and you both write your code and then kind of visualize things and document it all within one notebook. So the analogy that I've heard is kind of like an actual physical notebook that a scientist might have in the past, where they're kind of jotting down notes and calculations, and then kind of like how they came to certain conclusions, and maybe sketching some things out, and it's all included in kind of one narrative, if you will. It's a very simplified explanation for it. But within Cognos, it's kind of powerful because it ties into data sets, which is one thing that comes to mind immediately for me. So data transformation is actually one of the core use cases that we thought of right away when we saw how it was integrated. So you can actually pull data from somewhere, like a Cognos package, you can transform it, and then you can write it into a data set. Using any of the data transformation capabilities that are available through Python, which are pretty extensive, or actually not through Python, could be using Python, but through Jupyter Notebooks. And you can use Python to access additional libraries, etc. You can also create a myriad of data visualizations that venture far outside, even though Cognos has a ton of them built in. You can do all kinds of other things that, again, you could access through all kinds of open source libraries and such. You can bring it directly into your Jupyter Notebooks, and then you can even add that into a Cognos dashboard. So data visualization and data transformation are kind of two of the things that come to mind. It also is just a way, we've seen a lot of fragmentation between kind of data science teams and more traditional BI or analytics teams. This is a way to start to merge that together, because your data science teams likely are already familiar with Jupyter Notebooks, and now they have access to kind of your core governed data assets within Cognos, and you can kind of bring them, again, into that same world. So I think it's pretty powerful, and those use cases are going to continue to evolve and be identified, and the integration is probably going to become even more tightly integrated with Cognos as the application moves forward.
Mike, you should pass the mic for whatever the next question is.
Someone else starts.
All right. When should I use fully interactive mode versus non-interactive mode when developing reports? And maybe I'll also give an overview of what each of those modes are for people that don't know.
So non-interactive mode is the reporting engine that we had all the way back in Cognos 8 and 10. It's
And
ReportNet. It's old, it's stable. Interactive mode is the new reporting engine that we have in Cognos 11. It's slick, it's prettier, and you can do all sorts of things on the report. You can select cells, hide them, add them together. It's a lot of fun and very powerful. But there's a trade-off. There is significantly more overhead on the interactive mode reports, which means it takes slightly longer for them to load. The users can get confused. When should a user click on this or this? If you want something where the users can't do much, maybe select a prompt or two and have it load incredibly quickly, I would use non-interactive mode. If they want something slick, or if they want to be able to click on a graph and go to the Exploration Studio, you have to use interactive mode for that. If you want the users to be able to look at a list and say, well, I don't really care about this region and I want to group by this, absolutely go for interactive mode. That's the tool that lets them take an existing report and play with it. They're able to take individual objects from that report and move them to a dashboard. They can explore their data much easier than they can using the old non-interactive reports.
Yeah, it's almost, interactive mode is almost a way of dipping your toe into self-service. It's fairly limited what they can do. I mean, they can do quite a bit, sorting, filtering, grouping, aggregation, but it's all based on this report that's already provided to them. So it's kind of a way to get users almost used to doing some of this stuff on their own and being able to get some value out of the report that maybe wasn't there before. The other thing I was going to add that I'm kind of surprised Paul didn't is about JavaScript.
JavaScript in both.
You can do JavaScript in both, but if you have embedded JavaScript, it has to be in non-interactive mode. So if you have JavaScript within the report itself, it has to be in non-interactive mode. You have to use the new custom control feature where you load the JavaScript onto the server, have to write it slightly differently to use it in interactive mode. No?
One quick rebuttal, the JavaScript that you can use in interactive mode, you can use all these wonderful libraries, jQuery, Bootstrap, that you cannot use in the non-interactive mode. Yeah.
Rebuttal. All right. So the other place where I've seen it being used is to get people out of Excel. So I know we talked earlier about trying to move people out of the Excel. I take every Cognos report and I export it out to Excel, and then I do all the fancy things I do in Excel. In the interactive mode, you can do a lot of things like changing the sorting and adding grouping and filtering and switching the display around. So, when I was able to show some of our heavy Excel users that you could run the report, put more information in that you might need for every day, but then filter out what you're looking for, it almost becomes either a big prompt page or it could be I don't have to export it to Excel and then start to manipulate. I can continue to manipulate. So, if it's a good way to kind of get those users who really never actually even go into Cognos, they just take that export and bring them back in so that they can still work with it online.
All right. Any follow-up questions to those? All right, so how should we get started rolling out explorations in our organization?
I don't have an answer. You're back. Sorry.
Trying to give the mic away.
I know, sorry.
Where we've seen some success here is starting with a somewhat limited data set where maybe you already have some ideas that there's going to be some relationships between data points that can be observed. The point of the tool is uncovering those, but what I think there's an inclination to do is just be like, okay, I can point this to our data warehouse and just kind of try that. And you can try that, and I actually wouldn't discourage you from trying that within your team that's in the Cognos team, whether it be IT or elsewhere. That's not a bad thing to do. But if you're trying to popularize it or socialize it or train people within your organization, we've seen it work better to just start with a more limited set where some relationships exist. That way, you don't have to demo it, if you will, with just kind of sample data. You can demo with your real organization's data, but it's not so broad that people are overwhelmed because it's kind of a different sort of tool than they've probably ever used before. Certainly haven't used a tool like this within the Cognos tool set. So that's a good kind of way to get started from what we've observed with our clients.
And I'll also advise that the cleanliness of the data before you feed it in is fairly important. We had a fun example trying to feed in Chris O'Shell's fantasy football data where he created all these crazy columns that just didn't make sense and got some really good correlations, weird ones like certain score was the highest indicator of whether or not you'd win. Okay, great.
It's a true story, right?
Yeah.
All right. Any follow-up questions on this?
Go over here, Dustin.
Oh, yeah.
So, would you suggest if you have existing packages enriching those or creating new packages that are more concise and then enriching the entire thing to use for explorations?
Well, it depends a little bit on what's contained in those packages. Again, because people take all sorts of approaches to models and packages. Some people have, might have 100 different framework models, and each one has a package. They might have one big framework model and one big package, or one big framework model and a bunch of packages. Okay, so you got the huge one. Okay, then I would suggest, again, from a starting point, in order to try to socialize this in your organization, maybe create a smaller package. It maybe could still be based off the same model. There's a lot of maybes there, a lot of dependencies, but that might be a place to start. Create a smaller package and enrich that, and then kind of see what you get. Make sure that there's some kind of key data points and key relationships that kind of surface, and then from there, kind of put into your broader package and see what you get. A lot of it is there's just some trial and error involved. I mean, you don't know necessarily just because you point it to a large data set that you're going to find meaningful relationships there, but there's a good chance that you will. But you got to get people used to what it takes, how they kind of navigate through, clicking, putting charts kind of side by side, being able to compare. It's just a whole different way of working in Cognos. So starting with that more limited set allows people to kind of get the gist of it, I think, before getting overwhelmed.
Any other follow-up questions? How about completely brand new questions? Anything that did not get sent in that you would like to learn more about? Or ask us on the spot? Yes?
Just because you have folks who are here.
Okay.
And I know they can't go through the whole roadmap, but particularly for some of the ones in the other bucket, like Event Studio, what's the maybe a 1 or 2 minute blurb about the future of Event Studio?
Brian, you want to take that? I've got a mic for you.
Really?
No.
I have to look. We're going to include, we publish a public roadmap of what we're doing. I think that originally we had hoped to deprecate a lot of the studios and replace it with the more modern features that we put into Cognos 11. Although customer demand for Event Studio and a couple others has put that back in the roadmap essentially. So some of that stuff will be, if it's not already in .3, will be put into future ones. And it'll be published on the public roadmap. I just can't remember exactly where that fits. I know there was a lot of integration and some other things that were added, some mapping features. So as soon as that's done, I'm sure it'll be known. But it wasn't like years out. It was months.
Okay. The last part was months, not
Every
years.
18 weeks.
Right. Yeah, another question?
Yeah, at our organization, we're going to be rolling out an analytics as an add-on for Excel, and our finance organization really wants just to be using Excel. They're not really putting any Cognos or any analytics or anything. How do we mitigate the risk of them writing back if we don't want them to?
Okay. The question was related to planning analytics being used within Excel. How do we make it so that people can't write back if you don't want them to?
I don't have an answer.
I believe security can be set up to allow that, but yeah.
Just keep secure so that they have read access.
Yeah, cube security to set up read access only.
So then we have to have separate versions of the cubes that we're using there.
It'd be the same version. Typically, you'd set up like a security cube to manage it. Yeah. Okay. Does that answer your question? We can help run that offline too.
We actually we have a reporting cube where we have roles that push into the reporting cube, so then it inherently has read-only access. So it's the same data. You're not recreating the wheel.
Yeah.
By pushing it through rules, it prevents them from writing. That's something we do.
We don't have any of our TM1 people on this panel, so we clearly didn't think that through.
Yeah, if people couldn't hear though, she was saying creating a separate reporting cube can be a solution as well, which is definitely something that I've seen I'm usually operating on the reporting side of things. That's definitely kind of a best practice that we found is creating a separate cube for reporting. There's multiple benefits from that. One of them could be security that doesn't allow write back. Other could be better performance, the data structured and kind of optimized for reporting.
Right. Any other questions? Yeah. Oh. Sorry, I've got a loud escalator. Yeah. Yeah, so the question was related to developing in prod. So what are we seeing around developing in prod? Are some of our larger clients able to do that as opposed to having all development take place in like a development environment, move through QA and then into prod?
Yeah, I know from my experience, I've had at least a couple of clients that do at least some development in prod, at least on the self-service side. They still like for like the governed reports, like the financial stuff, they tend to still go through the dev test prod process. But especially for the self-service things that we want to start getting people to do, it does tend to work a lot better doing it in prod. They're used to that data. It's accurate data, and yeah, they've done pretty well at being able to do that in prod.
Yeah, I think we've definitely seen a lot of pushback, especially when this stuff first started rolling out, that people were completely unwilling to consider doing prod development, and which is really a limitation for self-serve. You have to, if you're going to do real true self-serve, you can't expect that somebody's going to start self-serving in development and then get it go through a QA process, and they're just going to take it out to Excel, or they're going to take it to Tableau or somewhere else. So I think I think it's slowly changing the big corporate mentality of only working in development when you're developing, and moving towards the real that more stuff on prod. I think that's what I'm seeing anyway.
The only thing I would add is that there's all kinds of like hybrid sorts of approaches that you can tailor to your organization. So you could allow people to quote unquote develop content in prod, but they only can save it to their my content area. So it's like going back to the days of like Power Play on your desktop. It's like you have this cube that is like the production cube, but you're saving your analysis just on your local system. It's kind of the same thing, just in a modernized manner. You could allow people to create data modules they have to start there, maybe in a test or a dev environment. Those get promoted, but then maybe the dashboards built on top of the data modules, those can actually be saved in a public area or like a team area in prod. So there's a multitude of approaches that can be set up based on what environments you have, how you set up role-based security in your various systems. So you can find something that works. You can also evolve it as time goes on. So you can start with one that's a little more restrictive if you need to, and then kind of change as people grow in their comfort level. We just tend to caution our clients, don't get too restrictive, because remember, people are pretty much going to do what they're going to do anyway. They're going to go outside of Cognos if they have to get the stuff they're looking for. So it might be better to err on the side of being a little more lenient, a little more accepting of people developing things and being able to save things and share them. That way at least you have access to it and you can manage it some way. Sorry.
So I guess, yeah, that kind of triggered another thing. Just kind of on the implementation side of how people actually do that in prod, from what I've seen, they tend to create a separate folder structure for kind of the play area or the development area within the prod, and then they have a highly governed tested area as well. So they kind of go into like when users come in, they go to either standard reports to see all of their things that have been tested through the whole process, or there's like a share area where they can have different team folders there and do their self-service and kind of do their development in prod, and then potentially some sort of process to get it from the share area up to the standard reports if they do come up with something that they really like and want to share in a wider audience.
Any other questions in the audience?